That's our
Funneling.
last talking point today, is this idea that has been floated around that MLS is going to decouple their designated player and U22 slots. So right now, the rule is if you want to use all you have three designated players, three U22 slots that are open and available. If you want to use all three U22 slots, you have to have at least one young designated player. This is to encourage the spending on players for profit to grow the league financially and all that stuff. Now what they're saying is we're going to separate it. You can have any of the deep. You can have all three DPs. You can have all three U23s. You can have none of them. It doesn't matter. But you're going to have the freedom to fill all of them, regardless of what it means. Right? What are your thoughts on that?
I mean, I guess it's definitely a step and it's a good thing, right? Like it gives teams more flexibility. They're not handcuffed into having to have a young DP on their team. But obviously it's not enough, right? Like we talked at length before about the roster rules, and I'm sure we have an episode out there somewhere where we've gone even in more depth before, but the real problem is with the TAM GAM level signings, like you said, we need to the core of the team needs to be stronger. It's not the star level talent, like you said. We have very good stars in this league, and I think we're going to only continue to draw more and more talented star players to this league. I think we saw that this last offseason, but we need to really bolster the TAM GAM, which for a lot of teams is majority of the midfield and defense, which is a huge part of a team's like core. Like obviously the star players can go and score and sell the tickets and be the headliners, but if you're going to win games and win trophies, you really need a good midfield and defense. I mean, we were just talking about Columbus. One of Columbus's strong points is that it arguably has the best midfield duo in the entirety of the league. Morris and Nagby are amazing, insane. And I know Nagby's a designated player, so maybe this is not the best example, but I'm just saying if you can have that level of quality in your team, it's going to infinitely make things better for your team. So I think the decoupling of it is a good step. I will never say that this is a bad thing or it's a bad move, but I think there's just so much more still to be done.
Yeah, 100%. Right. It's first off, it's not the. It can't be the last. It can't be the last move. Right. It needs to be followed by something. But I think really this is a good decision for what's about to happen in America, right? We're in a world where the Club World Cup, Copa America, the World Cup, I think the Olympics at some point later down the road are all going to be in our own backyard. How to capitalize on stuff like that is to have those players that you will watch in those tournaments come back in your league the week after it's over, right? So by allowing the freedom to pick players up that fit those criteria, you encourage more people to come watch them again, right? So let's say you're in Kansas City and you see somebody really exciting playing at the Copa America, and you realize, oh, he's just been signed as a U22 player at SKC, right? You might be more likely to go see that player again. Whereas before, that player might not have been there because all three of Kansas City's DPs are not young designated players, I think, right? Like just as an example, right? I think that probably tracks, but we'll just use it as an example for now. You're allowing an increased spending on different types of talent without crushing the budget or putting yourselves in like super big financial risk. That's a positive. However, while it's not the only move that is needed to end all the problems in the world of MLS, it is to me in the step a step in the right direction, right? What do you think are some other things that need to happen just to round this out here? Because I got a couple.
Well, I'll rehash the TAM GAM. I
Right.
think that's probably the most important. I think if you can, because I think not only is it going to be helpful in terms of just bringing in more talent, uh, to bolster like the rest of the team around the designated players, but it's going to be really useful for, like we talked about before, keeping talented players in the league. If you have a good academy guy coming through the system, you can pay him more money now and keep him in the league as opposed to seeing him jump to Europe and get more money. Like there's obvious incentives of going to Europe, like the potential to grow more in terms of your reputation, and then eventually even make more money. Like I think designated players get paid pretty well, but if you can really hit it off in Europe, like Alphonso Davies, you're going to make tons of money, more than you will ever make playing in MLS. However, if you can pay them enough to persuade them to not make that move, I think that's highly beneficial to keeping talent in the league and starting to now move away from this perspective of being a selling league to just being a league that is trying to gain as much talent as they can. After
Right.
that, I think I think actually I'll leave it there, and then I'll let you mention it, and then if you want to mention another one of your points.
Sure. Yeah, like I said, I think that's a huge thing, right? There's always this idea of like, oh, why would I watch this league if all the good players are going to leave? And then it's oh, well, you're only bringing in this certain player, that certain player, right? The more you can build a deep roster that is competitive at all levels of the field and all levels of the game, that starts to squash that. Again, the people who don't want to watch it are going to use an excuse anyway. Like until we have Mbappe, Holland, uh, Vinicius Jr., and I don't know, I don't really watch other leagues. So those three players like playing here in their prime, they'll still have an excuse of why they won't watch it, but it'll be tougher, right? Um, to me, the other thing outside of that, um, I've said this before. I'm tired of having two of the roster spots on here be homegrown spots. MLS Next Pro, alive, kicking, and growing. These slots seem really redundant. And again, we've mentioned it before where in the past it was good because it allowed you to bring somebody young onto your roster, give them minutes to train, and then you don't need to use them, but they won't hit your budget either. So you're developing them in the group. You've got a whole new league for that. Like, let's drop those two and make those two just, make one of them a senior minimum and one of them like or make one of them a supplemental and one of them a senior roster slot, right? Just make it so that you can spend more in there. And that comes with a raise in the cap as well. But that's one that I think would be relatively easy to stamp out if it comes with an increase in the cap, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I think I mean I imagine increasing the cap kind of goes hand in hand with all the stuff that we've been talking about before. I think that's the overall goal. More cap means, more opportunity to spend on different player roles in the roster rules. Hopefully we get to that point at some point, but I feel remiss. But I guess maybe while we're on the topic of roster rules, what are your thoughts on more designated player spots? I personally think that it's a nice to have, but I think there's a lot of other areas to focus on before that point.
Yeah. So thank you for asking what I thought and then telling me exactly what you thought without letting me speak. That was very respectful of you. I appreciate it.
Well, I know
No,
you. I
that
know you're dying to know my perspective, so I didn't want to have you wait.
well, see, I didn't even need to say anything because that perspective is my perspective, right? Like, sure, great, whatever. It doesn't address the problems that we just hit, right? The mid level is where we need to focus on. So having it's great, but it doesn't fix the problems that we just spent the last hour talking about.
Yeah,
Um, so yeah, I think there are a lot of things that can be done, but it's a step in the right direction to start allowing a little bit more freedom. And again, it's controlled freedom, right? It's freedom that we can go in and say, yeah, um, we're out here, we're gonna try and do things, but we're not just gonna rip the band-aid off and say, go have fun and figure it out yourselves, right? Controlled, make sure we're in a good spot before you take off the next step. All right.